So Felix, I was doing my research on you and, I could ask a casual question like, hey, tell us your story or, what was being born in Germany like and being raised in London. But I think it'd be really fun to ask you. I heard in an interview that you don't like the Tumblr look. And so I'd love to ask you what the Tumblr look is.
For a second, I had to remember what is Tumblr?
Right?
Does anyone still use that? So I remember, for those people who don't know, I'm a portrait photographer. My name's Felix Kunze. It's Kunze. And I was born in Germany. I grew up in England.
Yeah.
And when I was in England back in let's say early 2010s, I want to say, there was I think it was the Canon Mark V had just come out.
Okay.
I don't even shoot Canon, so I may have gotten the name wrong.
Yeah.
And they had put out a 50 millimeter 1.2 or an 85 1.2 lens.
Mm-hmm.
And it really had this very distinctive look. And so everyone was just using this new technology to photograph this fashion look. And then it was like a big thing, super low depth of field, lots of bokeh. And that was like, oh, I'm an amazing photographer. And then if you inserted nice concepts into that vibe, then you had this Tumblr look. And I always thought, right, if I'm thinking about life in terms of basic economic theory, if 1,000 people are doing that Tumblr look, I must find something different.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I started getting into lighting.
I love that. Was, just for fun, just splitting the difference here. What was the way that, if you see everybody zigging, if you will, what was the way that you zagged through your lighting? Did you also change your lenses, or were you like, no, I can hang out in the 50 to 85 range. We're going to make this look terribly different.
Yeah. I mean, I did love a nifty 50, that's what I did start with. And I always tell people, if you're starting out, get a 50 millimeter because it's really cheap. You can get a 50 millimeter 1.8.
Yeah.
It'll be great. And just learn to shoot with that because the 50 millimeter is kind of the most straight through. It doesn't zoom or, go wide. And I used to shoot a lot of music festivals and things like that when back in England for Getty Images at the time. And you just you got trained that you see a scene oh, there's some people doing this thing. And already, because you can see it, what your composition is going to be before you bring the camera up.
Yeah.
And that was really important to have that immediate connection between something you see and then you bring the camera up. And I remember I was shooting crop sensor and I had with a Nikon D90, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I got used to it, how it would look. You have this image in your head, okay, I know when I put my camera up, it's going to crop in this much. And the first time I shot full frame, I actually felt queasy. Because I couldn't, it was like having glasses on for the first time. Suddenly everything looked so different through that one lens that I had. So I started out with very little equipment.
That's awesome. I think we both, did you start on the D90? That was my first DSLR.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I actually started on an F60.
Oh my gosh.
Back in the day. Yeah. So, but that was when I was a kid running around taking pictures of birds and sticks and stones. But to answer your question about zigging while everyone else is zagging or zagging while everyone else is zigging or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a joke here somewhere, I'm sure.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So I got into lighting because I was in England, and anyone who's from England listening to this, it's pretty much overcast all of the time. My favorite joke is I love the English summer. It's my favorite weekend of the year. But it truly is overcast all the time. And in terms of lighting, you have this light coming from above, and then your subject gets these panda eyes, right?
Yeah.
You get a shadow cast from, I know you're wearing a baseball cap. You had to think about the lighting actually hitting your eyes, right? If you put the light too far up, you get a shadow on your face.
100%.
And the same is true for a lot of people with their eye sockets, it depends. Not everyone has the same brows. If you have pronounced brows, you're going to have shadow in your eyes. And in England, the way you solve that is you put your chin up, right? So that your light is coming in from the subject's chin up. So you get light in the eyes. But that doesn't work for normal people. No one walks around like this, No one walks around with just their chin held high.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of use lighting to get a little bit of interest in the eyes. That's actually how it started. And I never wanted to get that look where it looks really artificially lit.
Right.
I always wanted to just add a little bit of something, a little bit of interest.
Yeah.
That's it,
Yeah.
So I started off wanting light to be very natural.
Yeah. Did you know at the time, I think this is something I learned Well, I didn't learn this, but early on, as you start shooting, you start to like certain things that you shot, right? You have a photo and you're like, oh, I love this photo. But I think when you're early, at least for me, you don't know why you like it per se. You could say, I think I like it because of this.
Your taste and your understanding of what you're doing, like your taste is on one side of the spectrum and understanding what you're doing is really on the other side.
Yeah. I think about that with the catch lights. There are times when I accidentally got a catch light in somebody's eyes and went, I'm really attracted to this photo. But, if I told you that, you'd be like, well, yeah, Adam, this is why, because it
has some interest.
Yeah. It gives life into the eyes. Tell me.
You actually made me think of something interesting because taste is like, you can't just drink taste. You can't just buy it, right?
Yeah.
So where do you get good taste? Because I would never say, oh, I have great taste, but like I like what I like and other people seem to like it. That's how I make that determination if something is commercially viable or not, right? Do other people like it or not?
Right.
But taste, like getting inspiration from great photographers is probably the best way to build that.
Yeah.
Taste and not looking just at your contemporaries, but everyone's gone before because you can do new things in photography, but everything's already been done. And it's been done really well by like the greats of old,
Yeah. You just have to find it. I feel like it's kind of like music because of the internet. There are 1,000 great bands and 1,000 incredible photographers, but you might only know 5, and it's you need the Felix and you need the Adams and you need the podcast to say, and I'll ask you, who are Felix's top 5, photographers in his life, that you look up to?
I mean, you want me to answer that right now?
Go for it. Why not?
So I think in contemporary people, I've been just as personal connections. Really inspired and very lucky to be friends with Lara Jade, the fashion photographer. Sue Bryce is doing amazing things. I mean, Emily Teague and Brandy Nicole live across the hall from me. But generally living in one of the things about living in New York is you end up being surrounded by so many creative talents. Like in the area of Brooklyn that I live in, back when I was assisting, everyone I knew lived in this area. And it was so inspiring just to kind of be interacting with people who are doing fresh and new things. But I don't know if you can see, there's a pile of books somewhere in my apartment, like on this side, just this giant stack of books. But like looking at the old greats, like Richard Avedon, Henri Cartier-Bresson, Irving Penn, there's...
Are you a Sontag guy?
Susan Sontag?
Yeah.
I tried. I started reading her book on photography, and it's very dense.
Yeah.
And it's she starts in the photojournalism world, because when her and Annie Leibovitz were kind of in a relationship back in the day, Annie was doing a lot of photojournalism. And I think, I feel like, I don't know if the book came before her relationship with Annie, but Susan Sontag had at the time like talked a lot about photojournalism and how you just being there changes the situation to the point where like a true picture can't really exist.
Yeah.
Very dense.
Yeah, totally. It's one of those books where you start reading this and you're like, as a photographer, you're like, I really would like a picture book, please. But it makes you feel like an idiot, but in a good way. You're like, okay, let's take our time.
There's a great book I always recommend. Hang on. It's called On Being a Photographer. And it's by David Hearn and Bill Jay. And I can send you the link if you want for the show notes afterwards. But it's the best book about how to build a photography career. And it's written by a photojournalist and a commercial photographer. And they have like kind of this discussion and they end up with something really concise and beautiful about how do you, when you're just stuck as a photographer, you're trying to find your subjects, you're trying to find which direction you go in.
Yeah.
That's so hard, right? And then this book really lays it out in a perfect way.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about your backstory. We've kind of established, you're a portrait photographer, born in Germany, grew up in England. Fill in some of the gaps for me and how you got to kind of where you are. I feel like if you're one of those photographers where I look at your Instagram feed, it's like, oh, any famous person ever, Felix has photographed. So
what's my Instagram feed, Adam?
I think it's like Buzz Aldrin is on there, the Explorers Club, just all these incredible things. And it's, there's just a difference there where you're like, oh, okay, this person is, as is like a master of light, which again, you're in the club with Sue Bryce and Lara Jade and those kinds of things. So fill in the gaps for me, Felix, on how'd you get to where you're at now?
So when I lived in London, and like we talked about the light, and I was German, and I when I first came to New York, I remember I was walking the streets like, you know, you walk like at 1,000 miles an hour, and I had my headphones and I was listening to music, and I was like, this is the place for me. I just want to be here. That's it. I'm done. Like, I know where I want to be. And it took years to get there because you had to figure out, you know, the visa. Like I came here on an artist visa, and it's not a small task, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just always felt like New York, like the access to subjects, like you're talking about my Instagram feed. Now I've photographed Buzz Aldrin. I've been working a lot with an organization called the Explorers Club, which is exactly what it sounds like, Club of Explorers. So the Buzz Aldrin picture actually is a picture of 8 of the 11 surviving Apollo astronauts that I photographed for the 50th anniversary of the moon landings.
Yeah.
And it's a group picture of them. If you go to my Instagram, it's at Felix Kunze. That's FELIXKUNZE. Any photographer, you type in my name, Felix, then I'm the one that looks like me. In Instagram.
I love it.
Anyway, and so I've been working a lot, like pushing in recent years. So I started out like, oh, am I going to be a fashion photographer? Right back in 12, 15 years ago in London. And then we just talked about this kind of Tumblr look. And I love, like, I'm an amateur economist. I love, like, you know, I just dig into all these other subjects that fill out what I do in photography, because just focusing on photography, then you're just worrying about cameras.
Right.
But the subject of photography is about how you use cameras to interact with people and show the world.
Yeah.
So being a photographer really has to do with interacting with showing something, right?
Right.
And so I'm really interested in these other subjects, and I wanted to combine my like interest in humanity and exploration and space and all of that. So I just, for obvious reasons, if I'm telling you that preamble, not going to go into fashion. So I started doing portrait photography because I thought, like, well, people are the most interesting subject. They're so varied, and really, when you're taking a picture, you're only getting a tiny snapshot of that person's personality. And so as time went on, I just started doing more and more portrait work. I'd done some entertainment shooting for Getty. I was shooting music. Right. And like, there's something really interesting about being in a press pit with 20 other photographers. You're shooting a gig, and you're like, there's this 10 by 10 feet space. You're allowed to shoot for the first 3 songs.
Yeah.
And you never get up on that stage. You never really get an interesting vantage point, and everyone's got sharp elbows, and you're like in that little press pit.
Yeah.
Not getting anything unique. And that was such an important experience for me to have, because I realized, like, if I don't have access, like, the people who are getting great pictures of music are the people on the stage with the band or behind the scenes or whatever.
Yeah. On tour with them.
Running after this rat race of competing with other photographers. Like, just the idea of competing with the same people that were in that 10 by 10 box just became so ludicrous to me. That, like, you don't solve that by competing. You solve that by innovating, you know, getting interesting images. So it really got me thinking about what kind of people do I want to photograph and what kind of people do I want to get access to. And that really boiled down to, like, the environmental movement, people moving science forward, explorers, astronauts, people I've admired my whole life, you know. And I think we also have this crisis in not just America, but all over the world, where people don't believe science and don't believe scientists because it's this detached thing. People don't understand the scientific method. You know, we've seen that with the COVID pandemic. Scientists can't make absolute statements until something's proven. So people think that they have no idea, but they're actually the most proof-driven people in the world. So I wanted to photograph and put some of the faces behind what people are doing. So I've been on geological expeditions dealing with the environment. I went on an Egyptology project in Egypt and kind of trying to do my little part to give credibility to scientists and people pushing things forward.
I love that. I'll ask you some serious questions in a second, but I have to ask, I used to photograph music. I played in a band. Who was the favorite artist that you photographed? Okay.
So I love Muse, the British band Muse. I've seen them in concert so many times. And I remember I used to pay to go see their gigs, and then I would get paid to go to photograph their gigs.
That's awesome.
And I never made any amazing images, but I remember I had this real seminal moment at Roskilde Music Festival in Denmark, where I was like I had chosen not to be in the press pit. I went into the crowd and I photographed them, and I had like a little moment where I teared up, and I was like, I'm being paid to see my favorite band.
Yeah.
They're the best live band in the world, as far as I'm concerned. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's always been nice.
I love that. Muse Man is, I used to work in an office job, and the intern and he would always play Madness by Muse. And
honestly, it's my favorite song in the world.
Just the mad. It's so good.
But just while we're getting off subject here, doesn't that song just build like, almost like Bohemian Rhapsody does, like in this really beautiful way? Yeah, it's amazing.
They're so good.
If you haven't listened to it, just sit down, turn everything else off and listen to Madness. It's 6 minutes and just feel it like, yeah.
I forget the name of it, but they also did a song for Apple's the Trash Can Mac Pro, Supremacy. That's what it's called. And that's a great song as well. If you want to get pumped up before something's happening and just feel like you're, Iron Man.
If you have rage, but you're not a rageful person, listen to Muse.
I love it. That's incredible. Yeah. I think people underestimate. We've had a few music photographers on and are slowly trying to get more and more on. But it's even you, right? Your favorite show and favorite photographing time of a band is Muse, but I fully believe that if we could see those images, and maybe you say, they're nothing to shake a stick at or anything like that, because it is hard to have something unique in music. But because you knew them and knew the songs and knew them intimately, I believe those photos may have something different, right? Like my goal when I shot music was like, I wanted to, make my client happy, whether that's an outlet or the festival, but I wanted to make the band happy. I wanted them to be like, oh, this guy gets us. This guy knows us. He knows, when somebody's jumping at the right time, or he knows the songs. Whereas most press people, they're saying, all right, I got an assignment and I'm just going to make this happen. So I think that's fascinating.
And then actually that's a good story, because I remember I had gone, my mother, who is not in the music industry, but she knew someone who worked for Juliette Lewis's stage crew and got me a backstage pass. This is like 2008 maybe.
All right.
And I was like, I'm going to be a photographer. So I got 3 tickets to go see Juliette Lewis and backstage access. So I invited 2 of my friends, and they happened to have a car, and we were running around London the day before, on the day of the show, and in the evening we were going to go. So I was like, well, I can leave my camera with you while I go run some errands. And of course they show up to the show late, but I'm like waiting backstage, waiting for my friends to turn up. Juliette hasn't arrived yet. And then Juliette shows up and I don't have a camera.
Oh man.
So she's like, what are you, a photographer without a camera? She's a fantastic girl. And I kind of laughed, and then I was like, I don't know what to say. I don't have my camera. I'm such an unprofessional idiot. And then after, it was, I think the 3rd song when I finally got my camera. Wow. And it was just like this crushing feeling, because now I'd lost my chance, right? So I ran into the press pit and I took a couple of pictures, I was like, screw it. At this point, I got nothing left to lose because I've already lost everything. And those are some of my favorite music images I've shot. And then afterwards, Juliette remembered and picked me out of the crowd of photographers and was like, hey, you've got your camera now. Come and do some portraits. I think she felt really bad for me. And the picture I shot of Juliette that night actually got me a contributor contract with Getty Images at the time.
Wow.
So it's just one of those little things. I knew a lot about her, who she was, and made that connection, Yeah, it's true. Knowing, that's what the book I mentioned also on being a photographer. It talks a lot about the idea of knowing your subject, or just finding a part of yourself as the photographer that is a passionate thing about that subject. I wasn't particularly familiar with Juliette's music catalog,
right?
But I picked up on her personality because we just had this non-photography exchange at the beginning.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah,
100%. I think that's part of my desire, even in podcasting here. I talk to photographers all the time, and most of them in the first few minutes, that's why I asked the Tumblr question, just to throw you off on purpose.
Where did you even see that?
I think it was on Facebook video somewhere. I was doing some research and it came up, because I want to have this disarming conversation about, being getting paid for our art at the very simplest level,
right.
And so I love that. That's a really funny story. Let me talk to you a little bit about, we were joking earlier about your YouTube channel, right? And everybody is trying to, over the last few years, building their YouTube. Your number one most played video, and I wonder what does this say to Felix, is that it's about V-flats and either making or using V-flats. So what do you think about that?
So my number one most video is actually a collaboration I did with Ellen Chrome, and that's over on their channel, not on my channel. It's racking up, I think, like 800,000 views. But so you mentioned this on my channel, on my Felix Kunze YouTube channel. There's a video where me and my assistant at the time, we built some V-flats here in my studio. Yeah. And I remember there's a company in Jersey that sells V-flats by the box. And then they brought a truck over, and then I had 10 flat boards, and I had to tape them together. Mm-hmm. So a V-flat, for anyone that doesn't know, are these large bounce boards that you basically build for photography to bounce or cut light. So they're white on one side, black on the other. And you usually tape 2 sheets together, and they can open up like this and stand by themselves. There's a company called V-Flat World, which makes like a collapsible version of this, which is a big item in the photography industry. Their whole business was inspired by my YouTube video. And I know this because the guy who runs V-Flat World, Tuvi, he's a friend of mine, he is like, yeah, by the way, you're the reason I started this company. I was like, I could do this and make one that folds and is smaller and you can put in a car.
Wow.
Yeah. So I don't know what that says, but V-flats, so I have this lighting class called the Lighting Series, which I did with Sue Bryce, and it's at thelightingseries.com. And V-flats, like bouncing light, is such a big part of like making beautiful soft light, and making it look natural, which is what I'm all about. So yeah, that's probably why, V-flats are a big part of what I do.
Totally. I just thought that was really funny. And I was like, this makes exact sense that, somebody who is passionate about lighting and strategic lighting is, their videos about V-flats, right? Because that's if people ask you that, like, Felix, give me one tip. You've got 2 seconds. You're like, V-flats, bye. Like, that's it, which obviously you want to show them more.
Well, yeah.
But I think it's really funny. But we'll dive even deeper. The second biggest video on your own channel, though, is the human-powered Ferris wheel in Mumbai. So
that's very random. And I keep that. It's like I used to just travel and make little videos of random things that I saw, and then I put this up. But the reason I still have it public on my channel is because Japanese TV companies keep licensing this clip for their shows. I don't know why. Yeah, so
that's really
I want them to find it.
We'll link that in the show notes because for people who don't know, like it really is it's so fascinating and random.
Is that really my second most viewed video?
It's got to be up there. Yeah, I checked yesterday.
So I think we talked just before we went live here. About my YouTube channel, and I was like, I don't really put a lot of work into it. I think that's proof of it.
Yeah, exactly. And just that something so niche can show up, but it's fascinating. I would encourage everybody to go take a look. What has it been like working with the Explorers Club? We've talked about that, and I think it's a unique opportunity to photograph what sounds like, it's not just a cool gig for you. You're getting to photograph people who align with your convictions. So, what is that like? And then if you feel comfortable, I always like knowing, especially for commercial portrait people, give us a little, maybe not on the Explorers Club, but the practical side of, how do you get booked? Do you have an agency now? Are you, signed to somebody? How does that really work for somebody at your level and in your field?
Well, so let me just backtrack because we talked about kind of like fashion, and I had thought about getting into fashion because I really like these exaggerated situations in a picture.
Okay.
Right. There's people who are portrait photographers that come more from the photojournalism side and they want to be really true. I want to exaggerate people into kind of these stoic situations. That's what I do. And with fashion, you can do that so freely, right? You set up a shoot, like Vogue will build a set, they'll hire models, they'll feature somebody, like they did a feature on Lin-Manuel Miranda, the Broadway actor and writer. And then they include a model in the shoot as well. And they do all this stuff. And I'm like, well, if you think, for me, thinking about what the work a marine biologist doing is on an island in the South Pacific is so photogenic, and I don't have to build a set.
Yeah.
I can just go there. The work I did with John and Colleen Darnell from Yale, the Yale Egyptology department in Egypt with Egyptologists, in the, upper Nile area. Everything is already there. The set, the scenery, the clothing, the people. I just need to turn up with my camera and maybe add a little bit of light. If you think about that example in fashion world, you have to build a set. You have to create all these exaggerated situations. I can make my exaggerated situations by focusing on scientists who are doing interesting visual things and just show up. And that's something that's like the Explorers Club is absolutely like been at the forefront of all the exploration. And, everyone's a member, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, they all running around in that world. What better group of people if I want to add value to the world and I want to make interesting pictures than having those kind of people? Like I went on a geological expedition to Mongolia with Sarah Carmichael from Appalachian State University. And we were in the middle of the Gobi Desert where the Altai Mountains and the Gobi Desert meet, in the middle of nowhere, like no cell service for 21 days.
Wow.
Like we went to the middle of nowhere, we turned left and we carried on for 12 more hours, and studying geology, rocks. We were looking at a mass extinction that happened about 365 million years ago and how that applies to climate change today is work I really care about. But also I get to make amazing photographs. Like there's a Mongolian geologist called Aryun who is just the most like wonderful subject you could ever ask for in the most wonderful place in the world. So I started working with the Explorers Club about 6 years ago, and I just offered to shoot their, they have an annual dinner, and I offered to shoot portraits at their annual dinner.
Okay.
For free.
That's awesome.
And that's kind of how it started. Yeah. So I've been working with them for all that time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Tell me a little bit more about the second part of that question. Maybe not the Explorers Club, but in general, clientele. Are you signed to an agency, or how is kind of your business, workflow structured? Will somebody reach out and say, "Hey, we have a shoot coming up or a campaign coming up"? What does that look like, and is that different for some of those jobs that align with your convictions?
Right. So it's a hard thing because everyone starting out is going to have the same problem. There's what they want to shoot on one side and what they get hired to shoot on the other.
Yeah.
And you're always working on that struggle of bringing those 2 points together so that you eventually get to do exactly the jobs you love and get paid for them. Right.
Yeah, same.
The way to bridge that gap is the same if you're trying to do what I do, if you're trying to do for fashion, e-com, whatever. It's the same formula, which is no client's going to hire you for something you've never shot before. Right. So the first time you shoot something that you want to, in a world that you want to be involved in, you're probably going to do that for free. In fact, sometimes like with the Explorers Club dinner, I put my own budget in the first couple of years.
Yeah.
Now I break even because I use print sales to break even. Everyone knows it's very transparent. But it's still just a project because I really want to photograph those people and have access to those kind of subjects.
Sure.
And Sue Bryce, she talks a lot, and she's taught me a lot about just the commercial nature of serving your community and serving the people you're around, which I think is the biggest takeaway, because for every photographer, the formula is slightly different, but serving something, delivering something that's needed and wanted in your community is going to result in work, paid work. Yeah. At the other end. I mean, that's the most basic formula for breaking down that gap between what you want to be shooting and what you're shooting right now.
Sure. No, totally. But what about for you, for people who are new to, if you're telling somebody at the bar how commercial photography or portrait photographers get hired, what does that look like for you? Is somebody approaching you and says, "Hey, we have a campaign," or, kind of like, are you part of a collective?
Yeah. I think for me, it's so much been about networking.
Okay.
And making connections, and like every client I have is through a connection. No one, like, I don't think I've ever had someone just reach out on, I mean, now a lot of people know me on social media, I guess,
Sure.
But like the core clients, it's always through a connection. Other people I work with that I've been like helping or doing something for them. I have some clients that are like under NDA, so I can't tell those stories.
Yeah, no worries. You don't have to give any who's who. I'm just curious how it works, how people get hired, usually for people who are commercial.
I usually have always gotten paid work through personal work. So work that I'm doing because I'm passionate about it leads to paid work. You know, I'm doing some stuff in the space industry.
That's cool.
Which all came through stuff I was doing just because I wanted to photograph people and really push that community forward. So it's, and that book, Adam, on being a photographer, it really talks very eloquently about the process of how I do that. But if you go to my Instagram, most of the work there that I really love, I was not paid for. I do that because I got into photography to live a certain lifestyle, which wasn't about money. It was about freedom and autonomy and running around and getting to do interesting things in my life. And so I try to still keep that, you know, and I've never really been one to do a lot of mailers or ads or running these kind of campaigns that a lot of commercial photographers do successfully. I've always relied much more on my connections. And if you're talking about someone like Lara Jade, she's always like, you need to do a mailer. You need to get your work more out to more people. And I'm like, I'm perfectly busy as I am with just a connection. So my networking solution wouldn't necessarily work for everybody. That's why I don't want to say it's gospel, you know?
Yeah, no, totally. I love that. It's one of those things like people, you know, will always tell you how you can be doing something better, but at the same time, it's like you said, you're content at some level, you know, You're like, I'm busy, you know, my rent is being paid in Brooklyn, you know, that's all you can ask for in New York City. So
and it's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What is talking about lighting, you know, for photographers listening who, you know, I assume we're going to get a few that are big fans of you, you know, what is something you see in a lot of photographers or the industry where maybe photographers are missing? They're like, if you just did this one tiny thing, you know, if just one, you know, something, if you change this up, you could have this photo go from an 8 to a 10. And then what is something you see, you know, maybe in the industry that you're really proud of? You know, you have a Facebook group of like 30,000 people or something, you know, I'd say little light experts would be my joking name for him. So what is something you see people doing really, really well that maybe they weren't doing a while ago?
Oh, I see. Like how the industry has changed.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, so if you think about what we talked about earlier, commercial work, right?
Yeah.
Lighting for me has always represented the ability to stand out from everybody else. Because when you have 1,000 photographers, like in New York, there's a ton of photographers.
Right.
I don't like the idea of competing. Like I'm not going to the same client and going, oh, I can do the job Adam's bidding on for less. Because I just feel like, well, that's not fair to Adam. That's not fair to the client. Like it's not fair to me because I don't want to be hired because I'm cheaper. I want to be hired because I'm giving the client what they want and making something that I'm proud of.
Yeah.
So lighting has always been that for me. And so the little thing that most photographers I think miss is treating your work as a business, which means thinking about those kind of things. Stop with the whole competition thing. You're only competing with yourself. And in lighting, a lot of people who are natural light photographers and go into the studio for the first time, they struggle so much with natural light looks natural and then studio looks like studio. Yeah. And that's where I come in. So the lighting series is my class on how to bridge that gap. And the one little tip that I always give, Adam, is what people tend to approach a light modifier as if it's only able to be put in one place. And then they give up. So they stick it in front of the subject, they blast a bunch of light at their face, and then it looks like garbage and they give up.
Yep.
And what they then, if they really are courageous, they put one light here on the right side, one light on the left side, and then the person's face looks like a pancake and they give up, right?
Yeah.
The main thing, you would never have to buy a lighting class in your whole life if you just realized that the light can exist in a three-dimensional space and can be moved in any which way. And there are no rules to how you should place the light as long as you like how it looks. All the rules and Rembrandt lighting and butterfly lighting and they just create the lowest common denominator of everyone doing exactly the same thing. So you go to photography school for 3 years and you learn all the lighting setups that everyone's learned throughout history. And I did not teach lighting setups in my class. I taught how to see layers of light and make it work for yourself. And the thing that we've got is we've got my Facebook group with 30,000 people. It's called Lighting with Felix Kunze on Facebook. And there are so many people in there who've taken the lighting series and they're not getting that fake studio look. They're getting images that look like high-end natural light. And what makes me most happy about it isn't the fact that they bought the lighting series or that they're applying it, but those photographers are making more money.
Yeah, no, totally. Because their work can stand out more, you know? Because, yeah.
If you're in a town, if you're in a city and you're competing with everybody else, you're doing it wrong. You need to make more beautiful work. And most of the time, lighting is the issue. And there's a commercial reality as well for natural light photographers. And I get a lot of these coming in. The sun goes down.
Yeah.
Or there's a cloud and you're just like, there's not enough light, or you don't have the right windows, or you can't move your windows in the wall. You know, the window doesn't move in 360 degrees. It doesn't move in 3 dimensions. It's just stuck.
Right.
So getting into artificial light for most photographers is a commercial reality, because mothers who want to be photographed with their children that go to school are not available during the day.
Right.
You know, so it's all these kind of things. Our commercial reality is why people get into lighting, and that's where I come in.
I love that. I love that. It's one of those things I think I've learned over the years. There was a time when I first started out as a photographer, and I find this in, you know, I'm primarily in the weddings and event world, but most photographers where it's like and we talked about your heroes. There's an element where we want to glean the good things from our competition or our colleagues or our heroes. And we say, okay, that looks like a good thing. You know, I want to do that. And unless you're like a really good, headstrong, rebellious person, I found it takes a few years to say, you know what, actually, I do want to do this for myself. And I want to develop my own Felix style. And it feels weird. You almost want to like scream at people in a good way and just be like, do it now. Be yourself now. Like practice and develop your own style now. So you don't have to, you know, undo any of the damage you're about to do by wanting to be like somebody else, you know?
Well, I always said like my early development in all of this was an act of arrogance. When you're in your 20s, I was just an arrogant prick. And some people would say that I'm still that way.
I love it.
And I would not disagree with them. But all joking aside, I think I was doing something out of pride in my 20s that just so happened to work. And that's what you just described, you know, going, no, I'm going to do my own thing because I look back now with like, oh my God, I was really just didn't get that I should probably be a bit more humble. Because the work was not at the level that I thought it was. But I think a lot of people have that. You know, they think their own work is so amazing and everyone else is trash. And you can kind of use that, because what is true underneath it all is that everyone has a unique viewpoint, and they don't get a choice in having a unique viewpoint, whether they realize it or not.
Right.
And tapping into that is really hard. So I remember I gave a talk for phase 1 in LA, and I was talking about how photographing something you're really interested in and passionate about and you know something about. And this lady was like in the front row, she raised her hand and she goes, well, I really care about elephants. So how would I translate that into my photo business?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, you have to define what you love about elephants. And it's probably got to do with their grace. And, you know, even though they're like a giant animal, they walk very gracefully. They have a strength. They have whatever qualities that you admire in that animal, well, translate it into what you're interested in portrait photography. And you'll have a unique view because you're looking at something in a way that a lot of people aren't looking at.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, you have to acknowledge the depth, you know, in any scenario. I know even for me in the wedding world, right? It's so easy to just be like, okay, yeah, it's definitely all been done. And for us, it's like, yeah, I'm doing this every weekend, right? Like, you know, I might do this 60 times a year. And, you know, how do I look for the interesting and the reasons why I love to do it, right? And for me, it's like, I love, you know, when somebody feels like their truest self and there's no fear present, and that looks different, you know? And so I'm like, I'm always looking for that, you know, on wedding day, right? Where it's hopefully the stress is gone and people can be their truest selves for once in their lives, right? Like all the drama growing up is gone and all the future worries are gone, you know, but even, you know, this elephant, right? And you're trying to tell them like, well, what do you know, usually it's like, well, what do you like about it? What do you want to go deeper into it? And, you know, like, do you just like general nature, or, you know, like if you could ask Ansel Adams, if we could have him on the podcast, you know, I'd say, what do you like about landscapes, right? He'd say something
but
totally
he loved
different.
Yosemite.
Yeah.
Specifically, you know, he loved that park. And I think, Adam, let's use the music example. I think everyone goes through, when you're young, you're listening to the radio, you're listening to whatever everyone else is playing, and you are like, the music that is repeated over and over is what you like, right? But at some point you go, well, I actually don't like that. And then you develop your own taste. And that conversation with yourself of just going, am I liking this because it's, you know, very present in my life, or am I liking it because I like it?
Yeah.
So, and in photography, it's the same thing. Am I drawn to this style because everyone is posting it on Tumblr? Or am I drawn to this style because I actually like it, or it's something I want to put out into the world? And that conversation is so difficult, and I would not expect anyone to have it in 5 minutes with themselves.
Yeah.
But learning, like, what do you actually like is a lifetime effort, I think. And that's how you develop a style. You don't develop it by thinking about what your style is going to be. You develop it by just learning to have that conversation with yourself. What do you actually like?
Yeah. And I think being open to it, it could evolve. Your work is different than it was 5 years ago. And it's because,
oh my God, I hope so.
Yeah. You know,
depend on it.
Right. What you're pursuing is different. And maybe you can look back and say there is a common thread, right? Which for you would be lighting and stoicism, you know, trying to create this thing. But it's like, you know, you have to be both like willing to change, and then also like willing to hunt for, you know, what is unique and how that affects you.
And it's a good point, because so I have in my bio, like, I look for the grace, beauty, and fortitude in people.
Yeah.
And then I didn't look for that when I started out. I was just like, went over my website one day and I was like, everything looks like I'm trying to find the strength in people. Every picture just looks like that. That just happens. It emerges from doing a lot of work. It is not something you predetermine. And then I realized that, you know, my upbringing, my family's from East Germany. We were born behind the Iron Curtain in a country that no longer exists for good reason. You know, and we went to West Germany and then to England, and I always been a little bit of an outsider because of it. But also like the Soviet, like, influence in like the Soviet, like that, whatever, everything that came with the setup of the German Democratic Republic, which was not democratic.
Yeah, the power dynamic, if you will, right?
Yeah, and like the stories that my parents and grandparents told me about the Second World War and what it was like living under, you know, oppression. And so then it would make sense that a natural reaction to that is to try to show people in a real defiant, strong way. Yeah,
to seek out
and
strength.
It's not but that all came by mistake, almost, from shooting a lot, not from, you know, and having that conversation with yourself. What do you actually like? And that's I think the lifelong struggle of a photographer. It's like getting access and figuring out what do you actually like and want to put out in the world.
I love it. Felix, I want to know, last question, you know, what do you have got going on this year that you're excited about? I know the pandemic has shifted so many people's schedules and workloads, but in 2021, is there something that is, you know, lighting you up on your calendar? You say, okay, I'm looking forward to that. What is it? If you can share.
I just got back from Egypt.
Awesome.
I was there for Cairo Photo Week, and the US Embassy actually brought me out there to speak.
Wow.
That was really, really exciting. And so I think by the time summer comes, the pandemic will be a little bit more under control with vaccines, etc. So I'm hoping to resume my some traveling as well. And I'm just feeling it out, because I use this time to kind of give myself a permission to slow down. And you'll see on my Instagram, I'm posting old work that I shot like 5 years ago that I never got around to posting.
Sure.
There's a project I'm working on where I photograph groups of people in like a collage style, which is easier to see than to explain if you go to my Instagram. I'm going to be focusing more on that. And then like the little inquiries from clients are picking back up. So, you know, we're taking it, I think we're not yet, I don't quite have the luxury of thinking that far ahead in the pandemic, but we're taking it one day at a time.
That's awesome. I love it. You've plugged it a little bit, but where's the best place for people to go and learn, one, about lighting? Would you say it's the lighting class? And then two, to go say hi, you know, would that be on Instagram?
Yeah, Instagram is great. So anyone who wants to follow my work, which is, you know, the self-indulgent part here.
That's okay.
At Felix Kunze on Instagram. It's quite easy to find. If you just type Felix K, it should come up. For lighting, and this is what I recommend for photographers, if you're just so ready to get into studio lighting and you want to learn it, go to thelightingseries.com. That's my class.
Yeah.
It's probably the best reviewed lighting class that has ever existed. We thought very, very hard about how to teach lighting in a different way than it's been taught before, in a way that actually works for everybody. And go to the reviews and you'll see people explain that much more eloquently than I do. If you want to see the results of what people have done with the lighting series, I have a little Instagram called Lighting with Felix. It's all other people's work where they've used the lighting series to photograph beautiful images. So thelightingseries.com. But generally, I think everyone listening who's a photographer and is just interested in lighting at all, go on Facebook. Lighting with Felix Kunze is my lighting community on Facebook. It's absolutely free. You must just answer the questions that it asks you when you try to join the group.
Yeah.
And then agree to the rules, because we kick out any naysayers, and it's not one of those like nerdy groups where everyone's like, no, you're doing it wrong. Like we have, it's like a place to be vulnerable. That's called Lighting with Felix Kunze.
Awesome. Well, Felix, thank you so much for coming on. Absolute pleasure. And I hope that in the next year, things will get back to somewhat normal and you'll have more epic stories to share, and we'll have you back on.
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate it very much.
Guys, thank you so much for checking out The Bearded Hog. It really means a lot. If you can, leave a like on the video. If you want to see more videos, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications on when new videos come out immediately. Have a wonderful day, guys, and keep being awesome.